I'm Rachel Wolfson Smith, and this is The Future is Behind Us. The show started when I was watching sci-fi movies. I started to notice a pattern that when the people in the movies were experiencing some emotional need for connection or some drama, something in the movie would shift and there would be some idyllic scene of nature that they were interacting with. And it made me wonder, what is it about idyllic nature that's connecting with people emotionally in the future? Why are they perceiving that that might be a thing? And that brought me to the show, which was to answer the question, what is the role of the landscape in the future? In order to answer that, I knew I had to also look backwards. The sci-fi that I was imagining was far, but a little bit close, so I imagined it being 150 years in the future. And if I went backwards that far, that brought me in the middle of the Victorian era. The Victorian era was a genre of sexual repression, a lot of money coming through, and a shift from formal indoor balls to garden parties. People were bringing ferns in the house as images on plates, as textiles, and they were just completely surrounding themselves with it. So with this repression came this, once again, the seeking of nature. It was also a time where cyanotypes were just being introduced, and I loved that new medium and started to explore ways that I could explore the work through light in a new way. I'm living in Amsterdam right now, and there's a lot of gigantic Dutch bouquets and historical Dutch paintings of flowers that kind of tell a story of history. So I brought all of those elements together as I started to explore the cyanotypes. The cyanotypes only take 3.5 minutes to bake fully, or one song is how I timed it. And as I was working in intense sun, I would start to pull off different areas. And as I pulled them, I was also shifting other parts that would remain just a little bit. So any place in the cyanotypes that you see that are bright white, that object stayed the entire time. And parts that start to get a little bit wobbly or that document the movement that was happening, or like a kind of halftone or midtone, those are areas that were removed. And so this taking away was happening. They were a really fresh way to reimagine my work, which is usually kind of laborious, long-term graphite drawings. So there were just lots and lots of iterations that were experiments in trying to figure out how the landscape or nature elements could have this emotional resonance. My drawing process, I really consider it to be rooted in screen printing, where you have really specific shapes of light and of shadow coming together to create forms. I also look to the present at just things that I was going through in my life, and started to use the landscape kind of as a metaphor to express some of those needs for care or walls that I was putting up. There's one drawing in the show that has color, and it's a very similar drawing to the one next to it, which doesn't have any color in it. These two were based on the present and emotional walls. So there's a metaphor of these ivy walls being emotional walls. And so one is titled Emotional Wall, Nothing's Wrong, and it's very much just holding itself up and, being austere. And the other one is Emotional Wall, Melting, and the color just starts to ooze out of it. And it's not tear-like, but it's just a softening in that piece. And it's really exciting to see color in the gallery space behind some of the work and little pops here and there. And in the future, I explored making these sculptural elements that were really playful and a little bit cheesy, thinking about how we get things in boxes from Amazon or whatnot. So just using some really fun branded boxes and filling them with some synthetic nature to think about how that might fulfill us in the future. With the sculptural elements, they started out being thematically tied to what I was working with in the drawings, which were these vine walls that were really dense and that had a much more subtle composition and a much more subtle movement. I've never worked with flowers. I've always worked with plants and things that didn't flower. And suddenly the flowers started to creep in. And by the end of it, they completely took over. And there was a real celebration of just the richness of these forms and how kind of feminine and full this whole sculptural thing seemed. And they started to look like cakes or something. Really kind of decadent. You'll notice in a lot of this work that the movement seems to be captured in it. And one of the beautiful parts of that ties in with the theme of the show is that the show is so much about distinctly different periods of time. They're different, but yet they connect. There's, this emotional resonance that's in all three of them. And some of those things are really subjective. So being able to see the forms clearly, but also losing them and finding them again really feels true to what it is to be living. We're kind of slightly in the past, fully in the present, and slightly in the future at all times. The installation for the show was just a wonderful experience. I collaborated with Leslie Moody Castro, who's the itinerant curator. And she and I both are very experiential people who come into a space and we get a feeling from it and get this really strong intuition about how we connect with it and how the work could tell a story. I do that more with the drawings, and she was able to imagine the show in a way that led the viewer through these different time periods and ultimately gave you kind of a big bang as a conclusion and tied all the work together. She was interested in the physical space of women in their work and how the patina, this reddish patina on the floor, could be kind of crawling up the wall behind the cyanotypes, and that would lead you through to begin the exhibition. My favorite part of making this work is really seeing it all together and the way that it has a conversation with one another. The natural habitat for all of these pieces is in a messy studio on a dirty wall covered in graphite. And to see them all removed from that, but having dialogue with one another really shows me what happened throughout that entire process. And that's a really rewarding piece of bringing the work through to the exhibition. There's a phrase from women's suffrage activists that says, "bread for all and roses too." And the idea is that basic sustenance as well as material and spiritual fulfillment are necessities of life. I hope that in viewing this show, you can consider the role of beauty and the role of nature beyond just an ecological perspective and see the way that it can kind of feed us, and just to give people some food for thought on how important that is and how much value in a deeper level you can gain from interacting with things that move you.